Um, Hello, everybody. This is the October 21st edition of the Spin Project meeting. I'm filling in for Michelle, who's taking the day off here. Um, and I figured the agenda is mainly coming straight from the Spin 3.0 backlog project board on GitHub. And Michelle, when she briefed me on the status of things, pointed out a few particular points of discussion that I'd like to go over. And then we can kind of dovetail that into just a general Spin 3.0 discussion if there's interest. So the first item, I believe this was discussed last week. I wasn't able to make it last week, but the first item is the Spin 3.0 versioning strategy. This is related to some changes we want to make to the Spin WIP files. One is adding some new variants to the enum, or new cases, I guess is the terminology they use in WIT, to the enum representing different uh, relational database types. I think maybe a date time type is going to be added. And the thing about that is that even just adding new variants is considered a breaking change in the component model. And so what that means is we do need to kind of bump the major version of any world that, such as the spin world that we currently have published, to indicate that a breaking change has been made. But at the same time, we want Spin 3.0 to continue to run existing 2.x modules and components unchanged. And so what that means is in the Spin implementation, we're going to have basically two paths. If we detect that the component is targeting the newer world, then we'll provide those interfaces and the corresponding enum values. If it's targeting the older world, we'll support that as well. And so that's that's what's been decided as far as the spin runtime and development environment itself is involved, and in terms of how that's involved. The other aspect here is how we support this in Spin SDKs as we add support for Spin 3.0, targeting Spin 3.0 in newer SDKs, say the Rust SDK, the Go SDK, the Python SDK, etc. We need to be able to allow users who are not yet ready to upgrade to Spin 3.0 use the latest SDK, but not necessarily target the latest spin, if that makes sense. And it's not so much an issue if you stick with the existing SDKs. They'll continue to target the Spin 2.x, and as we mentioned, components will run uh, you know, components targeting that version of Spin will run on Spin 3.0, so that's not an issue. But if we were to just increment the minor version of an SDK and someone was to upgrade, we wouldn't want to force them to target Spin 3.0. So the jury's a little bit still out. We've got some ideas about how to manage SDK updates, some of which are more shorter term, some of which are longer term. Uh, but we don't we're not entirely sure. The long-term vision, I think, is that we would publish multiple crates, one for each target runtime version, say a 2.x1 and a 3.0, and maintain those in parallel. In the shorter term, we might operate based on in the Rust SDK feature flags, or in the Python SDK having multiple worlds, and in your spin.toml file, you would specify which world you wanted to target. Always being able to use the latest SDK, but being able to also specify which target runtime you intend to run your component on. So that's spin versioning. Any questions, comments about that?
Sorry, I couldn't find the hand, so I was just going to talk.
Okay.
Uh, well, my hand is here. Uh, um, so you're saying longer term, the end goal resolution of all of this thing is pick and choose and mix and match whatever, however you want. When you can specify in your spin app which world you're targeting, including the specific version of the world. and ensuring that SDKs have backward compatibility with those worlds.
Essentially,
That's the long-term goal, right? We
I
want to.
think so. And the mechanics of that potentially will vary from language to language because different languages have different sort of capabilities for this kind of thing. But yes, I think the goal is that you'd be able to in your dependencies, like in your cargo.toml or your requirements.txt or your what's the node one project.json or whatever, you would be able to specify the version of the SDK, and embedded in that SDK version would be, so it's maybe a little confusing, but it would be the version of the runtime you wanted to target. So you'd have like Spin SDK 3.0, Spin SDK, et cetera. At least this is my understanding. Till is the kind of the this is Till's
Okay.
brainchild. So yeah, he would be the authority on exactly the naming convention and everything like that. But in your project configuration for the language you're developing in, you would be able to specify which runtime you're targeting as well as which version of the SDK you're targeting. And the exact mechanism for that, I'm fumbling a little bit because I'm trying to remember exactly what his vision was, but that I think that's the idea. Yes.
And so, okay, so I guess that there are multiple things where an SDK can have support for one or more worlds, and a runtime can have support for one or more worlds. And then there's the eventual complexity of matching the two. And
Yeah.
so, but the current plan is that Spin 3.0 will have support for both the existing worlds and the new worlds.
Correct.
And so the question is, which SDKs would we also, I'm trying to figure out what is sort of the immediate experience
Hmm.
people will
Sure.
find when 3.0 comes out.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah.
And part of that question would then also be depending on whether new SDKs would come out when we release 3.0, because
Right.
I could assume if 3.0 has support for new world and old
Yes.
world, well, new and old world, existing worlds and new worlds,
Hmm.
uh, then it really doesn't matter. You can just like take your existing apps or build a new app and they will all run on the new runtime. So you really don't have to think about it. But once new SDKs come out and you want to use the new world, then you need to be sure that you're not targeting a runtime that does not have the new world. That is sort of the place where you can fall into a.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. We don't want when someone upgrades the version of the SDK they're using, we don't want that to be a surprise where suddenly the runtime that they've been targeting all along no longer can run the components using that new
Yeah.
SDK. And so exactly the mechanics of that is what we're trying to work out. And like I said, I think Till has a long-term vision, which I think we're all behind. Uh, Whether we can implement that long-term vision in the time we have to release Spin 3.0 or soon after is another question. And so we're trying to evaluate options for kind of maybe a step towards that long-term vision that satisfies our needs without necessarily implementing the whole thing.
Okay. But so it seems the because of all the different runtime implementations we then also have, which is, not only Spin, but also
Right.
Fermion Cloud and SpinCube and so on and so forth,
Yep.
then the thing to avoid right now is to enable the new world in the SDK by default. Like it has to be an explicit opt-in.
Exactly. Yeah. And so one
Okay.
of my proposals was, say, just using Rust as an example, we could add a new submodule under the SDK, which represents Spin 3.0, and then you'd have to explicitly be importing from that module in order to actually get access to that functionality. And you wouldn't accidentally import from that because any existing code would not know about that module because it doesn't exist yet.
Okay.
And so that would be one way to opt in. And as I said with Python, we basically default to the world that we continue to support the existing world, and then we'd add a new world that you could specify in your componentized py build command in your spin toml, and then if and when you're ready to opt into that, you'd specify the new world instead of the old one.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Sure. So yeah, and uh, it is confusing. We're trying to come up with something that's not confusing. Part of what's confusing right now is we do have a lot of different options, and so job one is to pare those down to like what do we actually want to do, and then that's what we'll communicate to users, which will hopefully be less confusing because we'll give them the way we're doing it. This is the way we're doing it, and you don't have to think about all the other ways we could have done it. So. Uh, Okay, so that's versioning. Next item is WASI key value and WASI config. I believe both of these, let's take a look at the project board here. Make this a little bigger. Uh, the key value stuff is in progress. I believe David Justice has volunteered to work on that. A bit of history here. I actually wrote a SIP quite a while ago for supporting key value stuff. Before WASI key value was really a thing, we had sort of a draft that was based on some features like WIT templates that actually haven't been implemented yet. Since then, the WASI Cloud Core in general and WASI Key Value in particular proposals have matured quite a bit. And so now is definitely a great time to go from our kind of ad hoc key value, WASI key value inspired implementation to something that actually implements WASI key value, as well as some of the features that we haven't yet supported, such as atomic values. Here, let me go ahead and up this here, or atomic operations, and including like increment and compare and swap, and then batch operations for efficiency. So I believe that's what David has volunteered to implement. So it's basically two tasks. One is kind of convert the ad hoc interfaces to something that it conforms to WASI key value for things like Git and set and open in the stores and that sort of thing. And the other is to add the new features that that WASI key value specifies. Any questions, comments about that?
Do we know if this falls under the nice to have or must have
Yeah, that's a good question. I would
category?
assume it's nice to have, but since someone's working on it, yeah, it's like we lose that information once we move it over to in progress. We forget where it started, right? Um, so I would think it's a nice to have. Yeah. So maybe what your question is really getting at is if it's not ready by the time we want to release Spin 3.0, would we hold the train or would we send it off anyway? I would think we'd send it off anyway, but I'm not an authority on that. I guess we'd have to make that call.
Yeah, that's something I can look into as well. The reason I asked is we have a quote that we're planning on using in
Mhm.
announcement that includes this feature. So if we're not confident going through, we might need to pull
Yeah.
that, but I can look into it.
Okay. Yeah, might want to just even reach out to David Justice. It sounds like he's keen to work on it, and maybe he's already, made great progress on it. Nickel?
Is this also a breaking change in the world? And
Um, no, it's not a breaking change. Adding a new interface, because the existing key value support is based on this. As long as we can, as we in fact are planning to do, continue to support the Fermyon key value interface, we can add support for a new interface side by side. And that is what we would consider not to be a breaking change from as far as the component model is concerned.
okay, so for broad adoption, eventually the whole thing that needs to come along is once this implemented is added to the existing world or whatever new world will be there, then the SDK would need to adopt this potentially, right?
Yes,
Because the
correct.
SDK is the SDK is using the Fermion key value
That's
interface
right.
today.
Correct.
So that's the change that well that wouldn't have okay. So since we can add this to the existing world, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it is a little confusing because it does, yeah, it goes back to this. So even though we could technically add it to the existing world, we might choose not to. We might choose to just add
Yeah.
it to the new world that has the other changes that definitely are breaking, because we have to create that new world anyway if we're going to do this RDBMS thing change, and So I would suggest just to minimize user confusion, it might make more sense just to add the new interfaces to the new world and only to the new world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then I believe in the runtime implementations, I don't know if the new interface would require something for the runtime implementations that are not using, like depending on what key value implementation they're actually using, which means that the runtimes actually need to update for this to really work. And I don't know if that's the case or not.
Yes, no, absolutely. The runtimes definitely need to, yeah, even if we add it to the existing world, yeah, the runtimes, certain runtimes, older runtimes wouldn't be able to support it. You couldn't run this on Spin 2.x because it doesn't have WASI key value support.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay, so
I think part
this
of
is
it's
a breaking change. Yeah, so you're probably right that we should treat this as a new world.
I think
That sounds
so.
like
Just to minimize confusion. Like
yeah,
there's like
exactly.
this range of things that we can do, within the component model versioning specification, and there's a range of things we could do, but we probably shouldn't do because it would just confuse people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sounds good. Thanks,
yeah,
Joel.
yeah. Okay, so that's key value, and then WASI config. I don't know if anyone's actually signed up to actually do this work. Let's take a look here. Let's see. Ivan opened the issue. Oh, is it? Oh, it is a PR. Okay, so yeah, he's done the work. And I guess we're just in the review cycle here. Okay, so, and again, I mean, this would be where you'd want to reach out to Ivan in terms of like, is this a must-have or a nice-to-have? Um, but looks like we're making good progress there. I think that's, unless anyone else has questions or comments about key value and WASI config. I will just say that's really exciting. It's been a long time coming, since we had the initial drafts of these interfaces to, something that actually people can use. Okay, and then let's see, general just Spin 3.0 discussion, possibly inspired by the backlog. I guess the first item I would queue up is this one issue in the new column. Brian opened this with the this basically this how this interacts with publishing to a registry, the feature of component composition and how it when you're composing with locally defined uh, components, is should a spin registry push be sort of a recursive transitive thing where by pushing your pushing your spin app, you're also pushing any dependent or any dependencies along with it, local dependencies. And he gave an example, like say we have some dependency, where we're composing our main component with this animal facts uh, sort of maybe subcomponent or dependency component. And at first, his assertion was that maybe that would be a little bit magical, and he was basing this on, at least people in the Rust world, if you're familiar with publishing to crates.io, a Rust crate, it will not let you publish a crate that depends on local projects because in other words, any projects that a thing you want to publish to crates.io depend on need to also be already published to crates.io, if that makes sense. So I think Brian was riffing on that and thinking, okay, well, you shouldn't try to publish a component that depends on local dependencies because instead you should first publish those local dependencies and then publish a component that depends on the published versions. And Land's contention here seems to be that, well, actually, it would be kind of nice if you didn't have to just, rather than kind of follow those rules explicitly, just let the tool do that for you automatically. Oh, I see you're using one or more local dependencies. I'm going to go ahead and publish those dependencies for you, and then publish the top level project. Uh, so if anyone has opinions about that or, whatever, please do chime in. I'm not hearing anything right now. So anything else that anybody wants to talk about on the board catches your eye?
I'm sorry, but I need to drop now. But thanks for Thanks for this.
Sure. Thanks, Mikkel.
Nothing specifically. I think just a meta point, maybe next meeting, if we're still targeting having an RC by end of October,
Mm,
doing a pass and seeing if we can get clarity on, in the in progress or anything that's
right.
not done, what we would really expect it to fit in there so we start to get a clearer picture. I
Yeah.
think everyone knows it's just doing a pass to make sure we're all aligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. Maybe I'll, yeah, make a call out on Discord, saying we're nearing, the due date for the first RC, and if anybody has any reports on progress or possible delays, this would be a good time to bring them up.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan. I have just a super quick question on the first topic we were talking about on versioning and supporting both worlds.
Yeah.
LAN created an issue a while ago of certain spin applications that were no longer going to be supported as of 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, is that still true? Like even with all the work we're trying to do to support combinations?
Yeah, that's kind of a corner case, as he pointed out. I think the main issue is this one here. There's a couple others with regard to grain and duplicate exports and whatnot, or duplicate imports. Um, so as he pointed out here, there's the set of applications that will no longer work are kind of predate even Spin's support for the component model. So they have to do with Waggy and basically using tool chains that didn't support the component model at all. And so they're kind of like in a third category altogether with respect to compatibility. And the set of criteria, where it's not supported, they have to be really old apps, like 2.5, 3 years old. I mean, maybe that's not that old for from some perspectives, but it's pretty old from a WebAssembly perspective. Then the guidance would be rebuild those apps with a newer version of WASI SDK, and that will be the fix. We just the technical burden of maintaining compatibility with using Fermyon Cloud as an example. There's just so few apps out there that fit into this category. We can detect. We've done the research, and it's like just a handful of apps that were clearly experimental and aren't really seeing any traffic anyway. Um, so yeah, that's sort of a separate category. We feel good that we do have a way forward if people really need these apps to continue working. They're just going to have to go through a few extra steps. Um, they shouldn't have to make any code changes. It's really just updating their WASI SDK dependency. Um, and then so when we talk about backwards compatibility, we're primarily talking about the existing components rather than Waggy modules, which are just problematic for various reasons. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because they're not components. They're kind of excluded from the work that we're doing. So
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
that makes total sense.
Cool. Looks like we only have a couple minutes left. Any last questions, comments? Thank you so much for taking notes. I assume that's Kenzie.
Yeah, and thanks for driving and throwing some items on the agenda. I definitely learned a lot about versioning, so that was
Yeah.
helpful.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll call it. Thanks everyone coming. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.